Are you feeling trapped in your 9 to 5? You're not alone. After years in academia, sales, entrepreneurship, and even retail, I discovered 5 critical signs that it's time to quit your job. These red flags cost me years of my life, but recognizing them led me to achieve the kind of lifestyle freedom I currently have. In this video, I'll share these 5 signs, including the surprising one that 90% of people ignore. So are you ready to change your life? Well, then let's dive into sign number 1. You feel like you're one missed paycheck away from disaster. Back when I was working in retail, I remember the $300 or so I was making every week, which was actually a step up from where I previously was. But it was extremely stressful. I had to somehow make that $300 stretch for the whole week just until I got my next paycheck. And the sad part, I wasn't alone. Surveys show that nearly 4 in 10 Americans can't cover a $400 emergency expense. So if you're in this boat, you're not alone either. But if you're making a very high income and still feel like you're one missed paycheck away from disaster, then maybe you can relate to this. Fast forward years later, and I found myself running a lucrative academic test prep agency, making a solid 6-figure income. This was more money than I had ever made. But I quickly learned about the trade-off that happens when you earn more money. Typically, you work more hours. And I was working a lot more hours, about 60 hours per week. And when I went home, I was taking the work home with me. There were always more things to manage and more calls to make, and it seemed endless. At a certain point, I started to notice that I was ending each week thinking to myself, it's almost Monday. Do I really have to do that all over again? You see, as I was making more money, I was also getting used to living a different lifestyle. And I started to realize that if I wanted to continue living that lifestyle, I had to keep reliving that same week and going through all those same motions to trade all my time and even health for money. If I stopped working, everything would just go back to zero. And for people with kids, a spouse, a mortgage, and cars, this is a place a lot of high earners also find themselves. But then if this is indeed a sign you should quit your 9 to 5, then how should you go about it? After all, it's easier said than done. You've got bills to pay or people who depend on you. We'll discuss several solutions to these and other questions, but first let's explore some of the other signs on this list. Sign number 2, you've been living the same day on repeat for years. This goes along with the previous sign to some extent. I've had several jobs and even businesses in the past where I felt like I was stuck in the movie Happy Death Day, the 2017 film starring Jessica Rothe, where she wakes up every day to find she is stuck literally in the same day again and again. When I was active in direct sales, my days often started to feel this way. Get up, eat a quick breakfast, get leads and make calls, do appointments, attend or conduct a training, and then go to sleep. When I used to work in person for various tutoring agencies, things also started to feel this way. Get up, eat breakfast, take a bus, then 2 subways, then teach, then eat lunch, and you get the idea. The problem with this wasn't the routine. Routines are good. Routines are healthy. Instead, the problem was the constant feeling of going nowhere and simply staying in the same place. And it's no surprise that research has shown this phenomenon leads to poor mental and physical health long term, as well as a feeling of purposelessness. And there's even a new, fairly fitting term for jobs that make us feel this way: bullshit jobs. In fact, recent research has shown that up to 19% of US workers feel they have this kind of job. Are you one of them? Whereas I used to feel this way, now if I ever feel things have become too repetitive, I actually have the choice of mixing up my routine or even going away to another state or country for a few weeks. But how do we avoid getting into this kind of rut anyway? Well, let's explore the last 3 signs first, and then we'll discuss some solutions. Sign number 3. You have no voice. Back when I was working for a particular test prep agency, they started all of the tutors off at $65 an hour, a decent rate in the academic test prep industry. After having us commit our time, effort, and energy for a few months, the company made a sudden announcement that they would have to cut our rates to $40 per hour. Now, fortunately at the time, I wasn't depending on this for my sole income, but I know for a fact that several of my colleagues at the time had budgeted their income ahead of time and had even foregone taking on other students to prioritize this company. And so it was extremely unprofessional to lower the rate so suddenly and without any input from us. My boss at the time was amazing. She actually tried to fight for us to keep the $65 rate, but there was never a time when the owner had a direct conversation with us about this or even considered our input about it in any way. It was just take it or leave it. And one thing you should know about the test prep industry is you get what you pay for. So predictably, tutors put in less effort, and as the rate went down once again to $30 and even administrators started to quit, we could all tell this was a sinking ship. If they had just set expectations appropriately and asked for input from tutors and administrators on a regular basis, they probably could have avoided all the problems that would soon arise in the company. But what if you're stuck in a job you have to work? Should you just put up with not having any input and suffer with the toxic situation? No, you shouldn't. And after discussing these last two signs, we'll talk about solutions. Which brings us to sign number 4. Your health and social life is suffering. Often we're so focused on work that we wake up one day and suddenly realize, oh, I've gained 50 pounds. Where did that come from? Or why do I feel like I have no friends? And I'll be the first to admit it, I found myself here way too many times. When I was running my direct sales business, I believed once I hit my business goals, I can focus on my health. And when I was running the test prep agency, I simply sat in the office all day, gained a ton of weight, and barely had time to talk with anyone unless it was work related. And these things have actually become so common and so normalized that most of us don't even consider them to be problems. It just becomes normal not to hang out with friends like we used to in college, and everyone else around us gets sick so often, eats junk food, and is out of shape, so our standards for these aspects of our lives slowly get lower and lower. Eventually, I realized that not having time for friends and running through my days fatigued, living on caffeine and eating whatever was convenient wasn't working for me. Now the story is different. I actually allocate time in my schedule to catching up with friends on a regular basis to have real meaningful conversations, and my 2 hours in the gym every morning, along with my meal planning and proper sleep, is non-negotiable. So the key question is your job so stressful and all-consuming that it's making healthy mental and physical habits almost impossible? If so, just remember, this can only go on so long until the results of all of this catch up with us. Last but not least on this list is sign number 5. You have a non-traditional mindset. I almost titled this sign, you have an entrepreneurial mindset, but I use the term non-traditional here instead for a reason, as we'll see. So let me ask you 2 questions. If I offered you an opportunity where you could work whenever and wherever you wanted, but you would make less income, would you take it? Alternatively, if I told you now you have no boss and nobody telling you what to do, and you keep 100% of the profits from the company you work for, would you do it? I think many of us would say yes to either of these opportunities. But then when I ask this last question, would you also be willing to assume 100% of the cost and risk? Then the percentage of people who say yes drops probably to 5% or less of the population. And this reality is precisely why, for instance, communism doesn't work. You see, most people value things like stability or flexibility over earning more money or complete independence. But when you put workers in the position of becoming owners too, it means not only getting 100% of the profits, but also assuming 100% of the costs and risks of doing business. Some people, like me, prefer this, but most people don't. And there's no judgment either way, but we should be very clear about what we value. Would you actually take less pay if it meant you could travel the world while working flexible hours? Would you be willing to work multiple side gigs simply to put food on the table while working on an artistic or social passion project? Conversely, would you be willing to drop everything else you're doing, work 80 hours per week on building a startup you're passionate about with pretty much no promise of financial return for 2 to 5 years? Then you probably should quit your 9 to 5. But with all this being said, how do we actually quit our 9 to 5 without causing real harm to ourselves or others who depend on us? Well, no lie, it's not gonna be easy. But if you really want to escape your 9 to 5, you simply have to ask yourself whether it's worth it. While I don't think the well-known entrepreneur Tim Ferriss has the most realistic strategies for transitioning out of our 9 to 5, he is spot on with the following point. Most of the time, we imagine the outcome of taking a certain certain action as much worse than it actually is. For example, if you really had to downsize from the home you currently have to a smaller one just so you could save up enough to transition into something you really wanted to do, would it actually make that much of an impact on your life? For me, I was in such huge student debt at a certain point that I thought there was no escape from it, especially because it doesn't even go away through bankruptcy. I was in literally 6 figures of student debt, but today I'm completely debt-free. But how? Well, ahead of time, please note that this is not financial advice and I'm only putting this out there as an example of what I mean. Everyone's situation is different. What I did was defaulted on my debts, hired a lawyer for way less than I was paying in student loan payments, and then made a settlement with the bank for a much smaller amount. But that was gonna ruin my credit score, right? Yes, and I could have let that hold me back. But the reality is that a few years later from then, my credit score not only bounced back, but now is the best it's ever been. I literally have credit card companies begging me to request a higher credit line. The bottom line is, the outcome indeed was not as bad as I made it in my mind. So if you're working paycheck to paycheck and want to leave that job, seriously evaluate all of your options, even those you really don't want to consider. If you're making a great income but feel like you're living every day on repeat or feel like you have no voice at work, then start doing the hard work of either finding somewhere you're gonna be passionate about every day or even consider transitioning into an entirely new field. Don't let the thought of, I've already worked so long in this industry and have degrees I don't want to go to waste, hold you back. This is what's called the sunk cost fallacy, and understand it's absolutely no justification to keep doing what you're doing. How many of these signs apply to you? Could you relate to any of the examples I shared? I'd love to hear from you. I don't know who you are yet, but whoever you are, you got this, and I believe in you. If you want to keep leveling up your critical thinking to make a massive impact, not only on your own life, but on the lives of others, then be sure to watch this next video.